right in. Joanna, yeah, if we could enable the chat function, we'd love to have that so we can share links during the hearing on the Army Corps plan. And we'll see if there are more committee members who have filed in. Seeing Trina and Laura. Okay. So, all right. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to Brooklyn Community Board 1 Environmental Protection Committee meeting here on January 4th at 6:30 via WebEx. We are holding a meeting and then a hearing. And the meeting, we're going to have one item and then just some quick updates. It's related to a brownfield cleanup program site at 210 Greenpoint Avenue, the former site of a Speedway service station, and it's had other legacy uses that DEC will talk about. So we're going to take in a presentation from Michael Solicito from DEC, and he mentioned that we have Mark Siegert here from New York State Department of Health. And so we'll allow them to present, and then we'll, the committee, if they have questions, we'll field them, and then we'll open up to the public to ask questions. And then if we feel the need to make a recommendation to the board for a comment submission, we will do that. And then, like I said, we'll have a few updates related to some old business and just some announcements on things that are, I feel, pertinent to the committee and the board and the district. And then following that, we'll have a hearing related to the United States Army Corps of Engineers Storm Risk Management Plan, specifically related to the Newtown Creek area. And I'll provide more details on that. But right now, let's dive into this brownfield plan, this project here. So, Michael, please take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having us here. I'm here with my supervisor, Sarah Quant, to help me out with any questions that we're going to have. But so I'm the project manager for the 210 Greenpoint Ave site. Today we're just going to go over what's been done for the site, what's planning on being done, and where we're at now, and just give you a little information on what's been found. So I'm going full screen mode quick. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the parties involved for this project, a citizen participation program. So that's where you guys can find information on the site and write comments. We're going to go over what's been done so far, where we are in the process of the brownfield, and where we expect to be in the future. And then we're going to go over a little site history, some sampling data that was found, what's found at the site, and a summary of the proposed action that's going to be taking place. And then if you have questions while I'm presenting, you can ask them, but at the end we'll also field some questions. So yes, for the fact sheets, if you'd like to sign up for email notices, you can go to the link below, or you can search on our website, DEC Delivers, and sign up there. And if you'd like to access any site documents, including the remedial action work plan, which is under public comment right now, you can go to the link, the second link below. And I can send an email out with these links in the presentation once we're done. And physical copies can be found at the below repositories or the Brooklyn Public Library Greenpoint branch. So they applied to the brownfield program back in January of 2022, and we accepted them into the program in April. With their application, they submitted a remedial investigation work plan, which details how they plan to investigate the site, what kind of samples they're going to be taking, and where they're going to be sampling. And that was also approved in April of 2022. It also went under a public comment period at the same time as the application. So once we approved them into the program, they began their remedial investigation fieldwork, took samples to find hotspots where contaminants were located, and they located 6 underground storage tanks that were associated with the site due to its operation as a gas station for the past 50 years. And that was all completed in May, the sampling. So now the remedy is under public comment till January 30th, so we can receive comments until that date. And once we approve that, we can issue a decision document which details how they plan to address the remedy. And once we approve of their remedy, we can implement it. And then once it's complete, we can monitor to see if it was done effectively. And I'll get into how we plan to do that. So the site's located a few blocks south of Newtown Creek and a few blocks east of the East River. It's this little black dot here. And then I have an overview map. It's located on the corner of Greenpoint Ave and McGinnis Boulevard. It's a 0.31 acre property, and it's currently vacant as of the beginning of 2022. The site history, some buildings were developed on the site in the late 1800s, and it then transitioned to a auto repair garage and sales shop. And then for the past 50 years, it operated as a gas station and recently a speedway, and it's now vacant. So the remedial investigation took place April through May of 2022, where they took samples, soil vapor samples, and groundwater samples to delineate the horizontal and vertical extent of contamination across the site. When they did this, 2 hotspots were identified where petroleum-related contaminants were found at depths up to 30 feet in one location, 12 feet in another, but most of it's at the surface from 0 to 5 feet, 0 to 7 feet. And most of the contamination found is petroleum-related, as expected from a gas station. And then there were those 6 underground storage tanks that need to be removed when the RIAP is approved. So we have this is only soil sampling data here, no groundwater. We have 8 samples, or there's 9 samples, or 10, my mistake, there's 10. But things to note on this are the depths of the samples where they were taken. This one's 0 to 0.5 feet. This one's 3 to 5 feet. This one's 7 to 9 feet. Most of the exceedances are in the upper surface, except for that one area I said goes to 30 feet, which is soil boring 1 here. So they're going to have to dig a lot further down to remove any petroleum-related contaminants, which are mostly volatiles. Yeah, we can spend a little time looking at it, but I'll send it after also the presentation. So yeah, mostly in the upper surface for each boring, 8 to 10 feet here. Yeah, and I forgot to mention the highlighted values are where exceedances were found for each associated contaminant. Okay. I'll move on to the next one unless somebody wants a little more time.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay. So next we have groundwater data. Again, it's all petroleum-related contamination. Once the remedial action takes place, the source soil should be removed and these values should decrease. The groundwater will be monitored after the remedial action takes place to see if these values are decreasing. But yeah, mostly volatiles again. Metals aren't a big concern here. And and then we have soil vapor. Usually we're worried about chlorinated solvents getting in the air, but none of those were found here, just petroleum related because of the gas station. So there's nothing really concerning with these values to note. Soil gas, soil vapor. So yeah, now we're going to get into how they plan to clean this up. So they're going to get rid of anything associated with the former gas station. They're going to remove the 6 underground storage tanks, and any petroleum impacted material beneath the surfaces will be removed from any site spills or anything like that. So they're going to be digging down to 7 feet across the entire site, except for 2 hotspot locations where they will dig deeper, one location to 12 feet and then one location to 32 feet. Once they dig to these depths, they will take confirmation samples to confirm that there are no more exceedances in the soil. Additional samples will be taken if there are exceedances, and they will over excavate to make sure that everything is removed. And then we have a figure of the cleanup plan. So the blue is 7 feet across the entire site. This hatched area and this hatched area, they're going to be going to 12 feet based on soil sampling data. They went all the way down to, I think, 30 feet across the site. So there's the limits of contamination go to 12 feet in these 2 areas. This is the 32-foot area. And the red is where the underground storage tanks were located that they'll be removing. Okay. So once the remedy is complete and they build the new development, they will do a soil vapor intrusion evaluation to make sure that there's no soil vapors leaking into the building and causing a health concern. When they do the remedial work, there will be a health and safety plan and community air monitoring plan during all ground intrusive activities to make sure that there are no exceedances in the air around the site. And a site management plan will be established once the remedy is complete with a groundwater monitoring plan. Daily reports will be submitted and photographed to us, and community air monitoring plan data will be submitted and noticed if any exceedances are in the air. And monthly reports will summarize the work that's been performed and the upcoming schedule of work. So for schedule, we're going to be accepting comments until January 30th. And as long as everything goes smoothly, we are expecting to approve the decision document and their work plan by February or March of 2023. A fact sheet will be posted again once before the work begins, and then they will determine a date of when construction is going to begin, and that'll be in the fact sheet. And then any remedial actions or any occurrences that happen during the cleanup will be documented in the final engineering report. So yeah, that's it from me. I'm Mike Felicito again. If you have any questions, please email, call, ask them now. And we have Mark Surrogate on the call also for any health-related questions. But yeah, we'll open it up to any questions now.
Great. Thank you. That was straight and to the point. Appreciate that. I have a few questions off the bat. What I understand is that petroleum underground storage tanks have, a finite life span, and that they often rupture over time. So is that, potentially a situation here, or has that been determined whether any of the tanks, ruptured and, the petroleum has permeated, the vicinity of the tanks?
So no leaks have been documented at the site, and I know that there's 6 or 7 previous tanks that were replaced, I think it was either in the late 70s or 90s, but so the tanks aren't very old, but if there were any documented spills, we didn't receive any. But when they did their remedial investigation work, they didn't know any substantial staining of soils around the tanks area. So I don't think leaks are a big concern on this site.
Okay, great.
That's what I said,
Yeah, and the fact that you were dealing, I mean, there really weren't, I guess, significant exceedances of, um, contamination levels. Obviously, I mean, they're above, um, I guess, regulated levels, but in your fact sheet,
Camera.
please, folks, please mute. Thank you. Um, So I guess the worry is, we're adjacent to residential buildings, both to the west and the new large building to the south. It's a busy corner. Just getting a handle on, vapors, fumes related to petroleum. There's like special considerations that go into this remediation, considering the proximity to residences and the site itself.
Yeah, so they're gonna have a camp station set up every day. They're gonna be changing the location based on the wind direction, so an up gradient camp station and a down gradient. And when the exceedances, like if there were to be any exceedances and the camp stations go off, they do spray. I forget what the chemical is, but it's supposed to suppress petroleum-related vapors once they get in the air. But I wouldn't expect anything to go off with this site based on the other kinds of sites I've worked with, because there's not much significant contamination. But that's how I think they'd be addressing that, and we'll make sure that that's in their work plan.
Right. Okay. Couple more. Has there been testing offsite, like, beyond the site property? Like, in the sidewalk or on either like a McGinnis or on Greenpoint? To see
So there
if
hasn't
there's
been.
migration going on, offsite?
Yeah, we don't, based on the sampling that's been performed on site, we don't expect any offsite sources or any contamination to be spreading offsite. We will be monitoring. There will be groundwater monitoring wells installed on the sidewalks once the remedial actions complete, to see if levels are dropping, and two, if any contaminants are leaving the site. But we don't have any reason to believe that contamination is leaving the site or, be contributing to other sources.
Okay. All right, great. And the last kind of concern I have is just related to the remediation itself. I understand you're removing soil and bringing in some fill, if I understand correctly. Just, it's a really intense corner. It's like the Indy 500 crossing the Daytona 500 at the intersection of those two streets. But there is, it's an active walking, path. And right now with the construction fence, it's really tight. There's just some very kind of there are barriers. There are those plastic barriers there, but they tend to shift around a lot. And so I'm just worried, like, number one, just stabilizing and maybe creating a secure walkway for pedestrians. But like, where are trucks going to be staged, exiting and entering the site to remove soil and bring in soil?
Yeah, it looks like the truck route is if you look at my mouse, it's on the eastern portion of the site. I didn't see anything with sidewalk plans, but I think they're going to have to get a permit to obstruct the sidewalk or road. Sarah, do you have anything else you could add with that question?
Sure. So the trucking plan is actually part of the RAP. So if you want to look at it, there should be an an actual map that shows the route. You can comment on it. We try and encourage only one point of egress to limit, where trucks are coming in and out of. I don't know exactly what this one is, but, they are limited by trucking routes as well and traffic patterns. But that should be in there for you to review and comment on. And then the sidewalk technically is off-site. So the site is the tax lot boundary. So we're not really involved with anything happening in the sidewalk, but Mike is correct. They'd have to get, the appropriate permits through the city to do any work with the sidewalk.
Yeah, but currently the sidewalk is covered, it's engulfed by the construction fence. So people are right now being diverted into the street with plastic barriers, basically separating them from the traffic.
Sure. So, we can relay that message, but it wouldn't be part of like our rep or anything.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think that's a big concern for me. And I should have, I know this is our first presentation together. I should have given you a heads up about the trucking plan. It's just like we like to just have a summary of that, in discussion, since we'll be reviewing it tonight. But it looks like, it looks like there's no good choices in terms of where access will be. But that's it for me. First, I just want to look if there are any committee members who have questions or comments. Katie, Denny?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Michael, I don't know if I missed it. If I did, I'm sorry, but what is the timeline for this project?
So we plan on approving their work plan in February or March, and that's when we would issue the decision document, and then work would begin on their timeline. So I would expect, within a month after our approval, so April, springtime, and I think I could see it going into the end of the year, fall time. Sarah, what would you say?
The schedule is provided in the wrap. Mike, you'd have to check that.
Okay.
And so that schedule, as well as the trucking plan, is not part of your slides tonight. That is the additional materials that the committee is receiving.
Yeah, we can. Well, it's part of the work plan. You can find it on the website from the link that's in the presentation, and it's in the appendix.
Okay. And I it's not so much a question as just a statement to echo Steve's concerns about the impact on McGinnis Boulevard, as well as some advice to work with City DOT, which if you've sort of done your due diligence, you might know that they've been doing some improvements on the boulevard, which is a major concern of this community. And so just to be sure that any sort of impact you have on that roadway doesn't in any way impact the work that DOT is planning on doing to improve that roadway during the upcoming year, because any sort of further delay would be really unfortunate. So that, as well as ensuring visibility, because that is a heavily used, I'm sure you can imagine, intersection. It's already kind of difficult to see, even when that was a gas station and you could see, turning right. But if you are blocked, which I think you're getting the wind that we're kind of all experiencing, added congestion already, visibility on turning is actually pretty difficult. So just please keep that in mind with your trucking plan.
Yeah, we'll try and have them scheduled so there's no trucks holding up traffic and parked on the side of the road, and they can get in and out. I'll get that. I'll relay that to them.
I just wanted to jump in. I pulled up the schedule that said it should take them about a month to mobilize, and then 3 to 4 months for construction. And that's just specific to the remediation, not, construction of their entire, building necessarily. So remediation should take 3 to 4 months.
Right. But is the building, the foundation, part of the remedy? The cap?
The foundation of the building, no, it's not part of the remedy.
All right. I would say, I guess typically, so you're not using pressure barrier, pressurization system. You're in terms of the, I guess the protective layer barrier between the ground in the building?
They are going to have a vapor barrier, but they are also doing that soil vapor intrusion evaluation to see if soil vapors are concerned, and if they are, there will be provisions in the work plan to address soil vapor concerns. So they could install something at a later date, but that's not part of the current plan because based on the sampling data, they don't really need it right now.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you. Eric?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so I'm gonna put on my transportation committee hat and just double down on these concerns about truck staging on McGinnis, as well as the current obstructions there. I had complaints coming into me going back to when the station first closed down and the barriers went up, that there were issues, and now that we're looking to, if you're talking about a 3 to 4 month remediation process starting when, sometime best case in August, we're not looking at a complete on this until sometime 2025, maybe even late 25. So I really need to hear more urgency talking to DOT to figure out where these pedestrian sheds are going to go, and what this truck plan is going to be. And it may be, like I said, since I've had complaints about this intersection already because of this site, I might want to get your info and have you into the transportation committee to address this, sometime this spring. And Katie makes a good point about the the work DOT is doing, to the McGinnis safety improvements. There are more improvements to come, and there's just a lot of activity with this intersection, and I just want to hear more urgency from those working on the site, to kind of rein in these concerns. So just putting that on your radar more deeply, and but thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, the
I'll
site
add
is
that
trying.
there's language in the RAP, and it's standard in all of our RAPs to prohibit off-site queuing of trucks entering the facility. So that currently is in there, and like I said, that's in there for other sites as well.
Sarah, could you repeat that? I was a little garbled.
Sure, I'm sorry. We have language in the remedial action work plan. It's actually in our template, so it's definitely. I'm looking at it right now. It's in for this site. It's in for all our sites. It says that we prohibit off-site queuing of trucks entering the facility.
Yeah, I guess in an ideal world, but I think it's, North Brooklyn is just one of the ground zeros for construction, and truck staging is a real issue. Just trucks lining up, in the middle of the night, idling, and double parking along streets, and just creating kind of mayhem in that regard. So
Yeah, Steve, it's Rodney, DEC. As always with any of our sites, they should be unloading and loading within the site. But if you do start seeing some issues with the queuing of trucks, or hanging out too long and idling, they're not moving in and out, make sure you just reach out to us, and we'll address it as it is. All of our sites are told what to do, but to your point, sometimes, unfortunately, folks will do what they're going to do. But it's always helpful when we hear from the community, so we could address that ASAP.
okay, great. Thank you, Rodney. Laura?
Yes, hi. I'm concerned that there isn't more concern about the possibility of contamination being, on the sidewalk or on McGinnis Boulevard. Approximately a block away when the sewage treatment facility upgrade was going on full swing. They weren't expecting to find, and they weren't prepared for a major oil spill that was there. It overwhelmed the community with, and you know, we never even had clear answers as whether it was part of the ExxonMobil spill or not. So I think there should be more attention being placed on doing some testing on McGinnis Boulevard and on the sidewalk for those reasons. I would hate, especially in light of all the traffic concerns there are, it would be a nightmare to find out during the project that there is another underlying issue going on.
Sarah, would you say anything remaining under the sidewalk isn't going to be touched or bothered? So if there was any existing contamination under there, it wouldn't surface or, you know, see the light of day. Is that how we'd address that? Is there any reason for us to look off-site? Is there any off-site concerns?
No, so like you had mentioned, we, you know, part of the remedial investigation is to define both the horizontal and vertical extensive contamination. If we thought it was going off-site, we would do additional borings. But with the data presented here for this site, we consider this a fully delineated horizontal and vertical, and that contamination isn't migrating off-site. I do hear your concern. There's tanks in a lot of places, so a block is pretty far from here. But you know, there's all sorts of spills that may happen with different sites that are associated. But for this site and the data we have, we don't believe there's anything traveling off-site.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, thank you for your patience. Kevin Lachero.
Sure, thanks, Steve. And thanks to the committee. Yeah, I guess I'm also a little confused. I mean, this is the way that this is one of the ways that I go to the subway every single day. And when I saw that this was up on the agenda, I was really hoping that someone from the company that is managing the site was going to be on this call. Because, you know, not to sound like a broken record, but I cannot highlight how dangerous this is on the street and the sidewalk literally every single day. The volume of traffic that's moving through this space and the speed at which it's moving. If what the DEC is telling us is that the sidewalk is not within the scope of what is being studied, I don't understand why the sidewalk is blocked. If what is being studied is the tax lot block, which appears to be like on this, what is lined up on this map that's up here, who approved and why is the sidewalk blocked? It's totally blocked. And most of the time, those plastic construction barriers that I have seen vehicles nudge, I saw a truck nudge one the other day out of their way, are not like the width of a sidewalk. They're not actually in the parking lot.
Stupid. It's just.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, folks, please mute.
Someone that's not muted. Okay. Yeah, and so I don't understand. I know DOT is on this call. I know Rhonda's on the call, I see, and I know Miranda from Lincoln's office I saw on the call for a moment. If this is not within the scope, why aren't these construction fences going to come down tomorrow and be moved to the proper location? The idea that we might wait a month or 2 months, 3 months or 4 months for these construction fences to be moved or addressed is totally unacceptable, because quite literally every day it is so dangerous. You got the subway, you've got the grocery store. You know, this is a major walking area that is totally blocked right now. If that's something that can be answered, which is who approved the sidewalk being blocked in the first place, and how quickly can it not be blocked anymore, especially if the sidewalk is not within the scope of what we're studying or talking about here.
Sure. So I totally understand your frustrations. And just a reminder that we're involved with the remediation side of things, the environmental side of things. So those sorts of things aren't really within our purview, or we don't really get involved in. So, Mike and I can happily relay that message to the applicant and how, we've heard it over and over again, but it's not part of the remediation. Outside the remediation, they are doing the redevelopment, and that requires all sorts of permits from, city agencies. So I'm not sure specifically who would have done the sidewalk. So I can't provide any more information on that. I'm sorry.
My concern, I guess, is just the level of responsibility and community accountability that it takes to block a public sidewalk, for months at a time, makes me concerned about other things too, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a canary in a coal mine, not to talk about fumes in that way, but Rhonda's on this call. If we can maybe have Rhonda address it, because I imagine the DOT is, I can't just put cones down in the street. You got to ask somebody. Rhonda,
Kevin, I'm sorry. This is Rodney from DEC. Could you just clarify for me? Because there's two things I think that I'm hearing being spoken about, and that's the fencing. I'm assuming that's surrounding the site, but I'm also hearing you mention barriers or cones. So is it both?
Currently there is green wood construction walls up to the barrier of the sidewalk. Basically the entire length of the site. Slightly, on Greenpoint Avenue, the most westerly end, you can still access the sidewalk, but then it goes basically into kind of like the parking lane, the space that is over there along that northern border of the property. So you have green construction walls up to the edge of the sidewalk around the entirety of the site, which I don't understand why that is the case if that's not what's being studied. And then you have plastic, like orange plastic barriers that are in the street around the entirety of the border, which are regularly being moved by vehicles out of the way, or whatever, adjusting or moving and shifting, leaving almost no room for people to walk around Greenpoint and McGinnis. And I know that this is a tangle of agencies, but what it means is that, people in this neighborhood are really in danger. So if DEC is in touch with the people that are developing this site, those people, like, that information needs to be given to our elected officials, and this problem needs to be resolved.
Yeah, we could definitely look into seeing what if, who, or why those two different things are there. I'm assuming the walls are because what's behind the wall is the parameter of what's being where the project is going to be taking place.
They just said it's not.
Well, again,
they just said it's not. Like Sarah has said numerous times in this call that it's not, that the block and lot does not include the public sidewalk.
Right.
Well, that's the remediation versus the redevelopment.
So again, the blocking off could be what is being done or being told to the developer by buildings department, because once the remediation is complete, they'll begin their construction project, which then leaves our jurisdiction and moves on to someone else. So we can ask, but I'm not necessarily sure we're privy to why that was set. But I mean, Michael, I think you could maybe reach out to the developer and see why they chose that line, to see if we can gather that information for the folks on this call, and ask if they have anything to do with those barriers or those moving cones or that you're talking about. I mean, that could be part of DOT's project. I mean, maybe Rhonda could respond to that.
Yeah, Steve, is that something that Rhonda can address?
So I'm sorry, I'm raising my hand because I didn't want to just interrupt. So if they're blocking the sidewalk and they have like a walkway cordoned off by Yodox or plastic jersey barriers or something, then that would require a permit from DOT. And certainly that walkway would have to be, I'm sure, a minimum of 5 feet wide. I didn't come to the meeting tonight prepared for this. I was invited to come to the meeting for the next agenda item. So I'm not familiar with this location, I'm sorry to say, but certainly the chair of the committee, Steve, you can send me the location and I can have HICLA. They're our DOT group that goes out and ensures that permit stipulations are being followed properly. So you could send that to me and I will make sure to have it inspected. You could send it to me tonight, and in the morning, I'll send it to them, and we could have it inspected and make sure that everything is appropriate.
That's great. Appreciate it, Rhonda. I'm sorry, what was the name of the division that you would reach out to?
So HIQA, it's Highway Inspection Quality Assurance, for whatever reason. But they're the ones that oversee that the permits that our OCMC division issues that the stipulations are being followed properly.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. I'll get that right out to you. Sante, I think you'll be the last comment because we need to move on to.
Oh, I wasn't sure if a board member were going first or not, but anyhow, I believe some of you said what I was definitely going to comment on, and the sidewalk. Just to echo what you said and what Kevin just said. You know, I understand a certain point, probably a development, and that happen all the time. You got to build a bridge, you got to build a scaffold, and you go into the sidewalk. But probably at this stage of the project, if the sidewalk is definitely was never part of that site, the gas station, yes, was passing through the sidewalk to allow car to get in and out. The sidewalk was definitely a public passage, and I'm wondering, yes, the question that Kevin has posed, why did we close the sidewalk, and why did we close it at this stage? Maybe we'll need to close it later on, but if we have another year ahead, which the sidewalk could be maintained, for the public and not intrude into the street. So that's what is happening. If people can visualize there, we entirely closing the sidewalk, and it's not part of the construction side. The sidewalk is the sidewalk, and so I'm not going to comment anymore. You have done plenty on the sidewalk. Hopefully it can be resolved. It's kind of uncomfortable. You get into the traffic lights and to a crossing between multiple traffic lights and a supermarket across the street. But my other concern was about definitely, contaminations, and nobody has spoke about what is happening with, I was looking at the Zola map to really have a clear understanding. I know very well the block.
Sante, sorry. Hey, okay. Folks, can you please mute? Algis, could you please mute your mic? Thank you. Sorry, Sante.
I can hear a lot of paper noise, but okay, now it's good. So other concern is about community, is about a small scale residential unit. They have like backyard there, and definitely adjoining these sites. So contaminant, it's a great concern. I have a question, what kind of contaminant? Are those benzene contaminants? Are the residential building a unit either on Greenpoint Avenue? I was looking literally at the specific address, going on Exford Street, 316, Exford, 318, again 320. They have all backyards, literally adjoining these sites. And then I will go to the 204 Greenpoint Avenue, 202 Greenpoint Avenue. I could continue, but I will invite you to go through the proper map and really understand that they are very small scale, old historic building with backyard. Did you do any outreach to this residential building, to the people who lives there, to make them aware, of potential risk, potential effect of this work and this possible contamination? And really, have you done any analysis in their backyards to understand? Because we literally have few inches of soil that divide this site from the yards. So I'm concerning about definitely the community there, and I love to know and be aware as a community board member if proper outreach has been done and people is properly informed and have a proper understanding of what is going to happen and what is happening right now. I hope I said that clearly, and I don't know if you have any comment. What can you tell me about this?
Yeah, so the remedial investigation that we approved on, we fully believe that they fully horizontally and vertically delineated the site. Like I said before, we are going to have air monitoring stations. That, in my opinion, would be the largest concern with the neighboring properties if anything's in the air and they're breathing it in. And we have real-time data of this this community air monitoring plan data. So if there are any exceedances, the construction activities are told to stop. They're told to spray until these levels go back down to acceptable, health standards. But as soon as these something's in the air for large concentrations, construction stops, and they won't continue. And we are told when that happens, and we make sure that work doesn't continue and that it won't happen again. Whatever caused it before is addressed, and because we don't want anyone else getting exposed to what's on the site. But petroleum compounds in general aren't as large of a concern as say as if it was a dry cleaner. So, but I think in terms of what's underneath the surface when they're digging, I don't think any petroleum is going to leak into their cellars or anything like that. We have a good understanding of where the contamination is on site. But yeah, just the air would be the main concern. And like I said, if there are exceedances, work will stop and people will be notified.
Mike and Rodney, a site contact list was created for this site as normal practice, correct?
Yes.
So residents in a reasonable distance from this site have received fact sheets or been alerted in some way if they're part of listserv and such, right?
Yeah, that's been done, standard practice. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that folks who are concerned about, our communication to the public, that it has been going on. It's part of our normal practice. We're appreciative of Steve inviting us here today so that we can continue that outreach to the public and answer the questions and make ourselves available. I'm sure Michael's information is on the fact sheets and is at any of the repositories. So, beyond today, if any questions do come up, please feel free to reach out to Michael. The community board and many other folks on this call have my number, so you can definitely get to me if you can't get to the project manager. DEC will always make ourselves available to answer whatever questions, obviously fit in our purview, and we'll do our best to reach out to folks that we coordinate with, even if it's not necessarily within our jurisdiction, just to relay the message, because that's the relationship we built with this community and the city of New York, and we want to continue to serve in that manner. So, if any questions come up that are not answered here, please feel free to reach out to us so we can get those answered for you.
I just want to say I received your fact sheet a couple weeks ago, so the mailing did seem to have happened.
Thank you. It's good to know.
I have a question for you. Are you aware, Steve, what kind of communication the community, the surrounding community received when I know they spoke about a notice? Is that something clearly understanding that explain clearly what is happening and what kind of format what kind of format the resident received?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I was asking. I don't know. You probably heard about
Well,
this before.
The board receives a fact sheet related to the project that basically summarizes what the plan is, summarizes the site characterization, the remedy, this history of the site, and the timeline.
What the close by resident, what kind of notice the close by resident received?
That I'm not aware of. So I don't know
Right,
if the
that's-
DEC can
Would be
answer that.
interesting. I'd love to know, just for curiosity.
It's the
Is
fact
that-
sheet.
Yeah, as somebody
So
just
we-
mentioned who received it, it is the same fact sheet that I'm sorry, sir, that the community board has received.
Right, but that's if you sign up on the DEC mailing list. Is there a requirement or a policy in terms of contacting, residents or businesses within a certain, vicinity a certain distance of the site.
Yep, that's that contact list that we mentioned. So when we get the application, the applicants are required to mail the public notice that the application's out for comment. Hard copies go out to that contact list, which includes the adjacent neighborhood. And then the first fact sheet, which is what you all received, is required to go out hard copies to yourselves in the adjacent neighborhood. And that includes a cover sheet that says for future mailings, you'll have to sign up for the listserv. And then from that point out, it's listserv contact. And it is required to go out certified mail.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sante. All right, so I think we're going to close this item, but I think, there are some major concerns here that are expressed first, just with the overall remediation and contamination, dealing with petroleum. Granted, it's, we're not dealing with chlorinated solvents, which, greater concern, but vapor intrusions, a dirty word in this neighborhood. So, in Freeman Street, we had a major, problem down there with some residents who encountered that. And we had, situation at 34 Berry, where, to Laura's point, they had the initial remedial investigation, they had a certain characterization of the site, but then as they got into it, and I think actually if the building was constructed, the contamination was kind of off the charts, more than they anticipated. So we really want to avoid that. And I think that's a major concern. Site migration, just in the sidewalk, neighboring residences and yards. I hear that's a concern. And then just the safety on the sidewalk and the street, in terms of just the construction shed being to the street and this haphazard alignment of, plastic jersey barriers, in relation to the ongoing safety improvements being implemented on McGinnis Boulevard, which is a hellish street that intersects Greenpoint Avenue, a semi-major artery. So, and hearing is that, it's involving, the transportation realm to a great extent. So I feel like, I'm going to reach out to Rhonda and get her the fact sheet and the location, but, Transportation Chair Eric Mercedes is here and has put it out there that he's encountered, complaints related to that intersection and those barriers and the layout. So, I'd like to suggest compiling that into a comment to put before the full board for submission to DEC. Folks have any thoughts about that or want to add to it, or from the committee? All right. Well, then I'd like to make a motion to recommend a comment to DEC related to all the points that I just made. Can I get a second?
I will second that, Steve.
Katie, Denny, Horowitz, a second. And let me get a vote here. Steve Chesler, yes. Eric Mercedes,
Aye.
Corey Kenton,
Yes.
Katie, Denny, Horowitz,
Yes.
Yoel Lowe, Trina McKeever,
Yes.
Janice Peterson, Bella Sable. Is Bella connected? I know she has audio issues sometimes. Anybody see her on the call here? No? Okay. William Vega.
Yes.
Thank you, William. Laura Hoffman,
Yes.
Kevin Costa, Kia Stewart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Unanimous, 7 votes. In favor, no votes, no abstentions, motion carries. And we have a quorum, which is awesome. So thank you, committee members. Thank you, everyone from DEC and DOH for being here, and Rhonda for chiming in. Appreciate that. I think you're getting the message that we have a lot of worries about this site. Just the state of, the characterization and what's being radiated here, but the location and the way that's being handled, is troublesome. So, we'll crunch that into a comment that will be put before the full board for a vote on Tuesday next week. So, but thanks again. Yeah, if you could, Michael, send the presentation file to us. Very much appreciated. So, all right. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks.
Moving along, I just want to mention some updates. 315 Berry Street. Just remember, it's a BSA special permit application to install a battery storage system on top of a loft building, residential loft building, which in a joint committee, land use and environmental voted against it, citing safety concerns and issues between the tenants and the owners and the state of the building. There was a lot of interaction between the applicants and BSA. They revised their application, relocating parts of the system on the ground, reconfiguring the layout on top of the building. But the tenants are still very, very upset and concerned about, mainly if this system was to ignite. And though it's not the lithium ion battery that it's made from cobalt and other chemicals that you just hear about igniting, whether it's e-bikes or hoverboards or Teslas. It's a different chemical makeup, lithium phosphate, and I believe there's iron in it. But if you do the research, there was a major fire with a battery system on top of a department store in Beijing, China, where 2 firefighters were killed. But the details, were, no one knows exactly what caused the fire. But that's, all the reason to contribute to a continuing concern. And so the board, based on a committee's recommendation, sent a letter to the fire department of New York City requesting details on how they would extinguish a fire of this type in that location, and to appear before the board this Tuesday during the hearing portion to discuss those details with the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice present. They've acknowledged our request for both, but they have not either responded in writing to these details that we requested, nor confirming that they will appear to give the presentation on WebEx next week. There's been a lot of press about this application, and so I want to say subsequently, but the applicant basically requested an adjournment from next week's BSA hearing, which is essentially a postponement. They will, appear down the line, if I understand, it's related to doing an environmental assessment. So that's the state of that. I don't know if anyone has a quick question or comment. Yes.
Excuse me, Chair. Chesler, we received an email from the fire department just a few minutes ago. They will be in attendance at the community board meeting next week.
Wow. Well, how do you like that? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Joanna, for that. Look forward to hearing that presentation. Okay, and the next item that I want to update on, the community board received one of those, onslaught of announcements from our governor. But one that really stood out is that they announced that there's going to be a transmission line constructed hundreds of miles from Quebec, from a hydropower electric station that will go all the way to New York City. So offer fossil fuel energy, a significant portion, I thought I heard around 30% potentially of New York City's energy supply. So I was really happy, I was really glad to see that. I know this committee and this board has pushed back hard on fossil fuel infrastructure projects that seem to be centered on our neighborhood, pipelines and upgrades to natural gas, vaporizers, et cetera. So it's great to see that. Hope there's more of those types of projects in the pipeline I'm sorry for the pun, to get us to the climate goals that the state has established. And the last thing that we have is we also do notice that there is a pump station along Newtown Creek that basically helps mitigate the combined sewage outfalls that occur. There are 13 of them along Newtown Creek. And they announced an upgrade that is being, entering the, design and development phase. This is a small but significant portion of the long-term pollution control plan, where the city, the whole harbor area, has to attempt to comply with the Clean Water Act, which they have not complied with. And so for Newtown Creek, it's supposed to reduce the sewage contamination a little around 70%, and it's supposed to be about 10% of it. But we have Willis Elkins, Executive Director of Newtown Creek Alliance, and we've asked him if he could maybe add some more insight to that development.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. Yeah, the upgrade to it's on the Queen side of the creek, the Borden Avenue pump station. It's only a 70% reduction for one of the tributaries of the creek. So overall, it's positive news for that one tributary, but for the entire creek, the city's long-term control plan only gives us about a 60% reduction, and it's the Dutch Kills tributary, which is across from the Newtown Creek Nature Walk in Queens. And so we're getting about a 60% reduction in terms of sewage overflow, and that's, but which is a positive step, but it's still not, it's going to take us 20 years to get there. And that 60% reduction is also based on old data. So we know with climate change, we're getting more intense rain events, which means more combined sewage overflow. So, in terms of like Newtown Creek Alliance, we're, supportive of the step forward, but we need to see a lot more investment to reduce sewage overflow, especially things like green infrastructure. The other thing I'd mention just real quick is that the downside of this pump station upgrade is that while it's reducing sewage overflow into Newtown Creek, it's actually diverting overflow and increasing sewage overflow into the East River. So along outfalls near Bushwick Inlet and the Navy Yard are actually going to get an increase. And so it's something that, I think we should work more on as a CB1 committee to fight back on, especially as we're going to have, access opening to Bushwick Inlet itself. The Navy Yard is already, severely impacted by sewage overflow. There's new development happening there as well along Kent. So, there's going to be more people interacting with the waterways along Greenpoint and Williamsburg, and we can be having more sewage overflow happening. So I know, Steve, you've been very involved in this and attending a lot of these meetings over the years, as well as a lot of the other folks on the call. But the city hasn't finalized their long-term control plan for the East River. So there's still an opportunity. I don't know what's happening with that. It got sort of delayed with COVID, but there's still an opportunity to sort of do more organizing. So I don't want to take too much time tonight, but I appreciate you bringing that up. There's, some good things happening. momentum for the creek, but there's still a lot of work to be done, especially places outside of Utah Creek like the East River, Bushwick Inlet, Navy Yard, etc.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Willis. That's pretty huge. It's really good. Thanks for clarifying the details on that pump station and the potential consequences. I know Catherine Thompson from Benjamin Inlet Park is here, and Katie Denny's with Norfolk and Parks Alliance, issues for that. And it sort of foreshadows talking about the Army Corps plan, because as you'll see, if you haven't, looked at any of the plan details, it will not include any shoreline south of Greenpoint Avenue. So it's just maybe just be adding layers of additional sewage. I mean, it's an area of investigation of just the kind of the, as they call, the induced flooding potential from this. So, so thanks a lot for that. I think that's an area we need to revisit as a committee, but as a community as a whole. I know there are other, I think we have some NBN people, Norfolk and Neighbors folks here. So yeah, we can take a deeper dive into that. Anybody have a quick comment or question about that before we really got to move on to the storm risk plan? No? Okay, great. All right, thanks again, Willis. I know we'll be circling back with you shortly. So that is we'll adjourn our meeting, which is great. And now we're moving on to going to have a hearing. It's sort of a kind of an informal hearing. We don't have the Army Corps here. We're talking about the New York, New Jersey Harbor tributary study related to storm risk management. They have a draft plan on the table about managing the predicted worsening storm surges from increasingly more powerful storms. Hurricane Sandy, even if you can imagine, stronger and more powerful than that, as the atmosphere and the ocean water get warmer. Big storms, they like that. So just kind of brief everyone kind of where we're at with this. The Army Corps presented to the Newtown Creek CAG, I believe it was in October, and then they came into the Environmental Protection Committee, in the end of November, and gave us a presentation. And at that time, that comment deadline was January 6th. But through kind of citywide pushback, including this board, they extended it 2 months, which is helpful, but which we'll very much take advantage of, because last month it was impossible to respond to the plan. But really, I think a year would be more appropriate to go through it. But I've also had, I've gone to additional presentations by the Corps in Manhattan, talked to one of the engineers on the ground, and city agencies, parks and city planning. And they both said that, they're still reviewing the plan, and they're deferring to the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice as the lead from the city on the project, and that it's going to be a years-long process. And as you'll see, I'm going to just go through an abridged version of the Army Corps' presentation. There's a process to really question and rethink the details of the plan. So let me get that up here. Okay. So what I'll do, it's going to show you some materials here just to give you a sense of the plan. And then I'm going to let Willis again offer some perspective from Newtown Creek Alliance, because they've taken a deeper dive into this draft plan. And then I'll just quickly summarize kind of what the committee, kind of the main and committee members who attended the last meeting, kind of what they put out there. And then we'll open up to all of you to just offer your thoughts and concerns and ideas. And the idea is then we'll take all that input and we're going to draft a response that we will review at our next Environmental Protection Committee meeting in February, and then have the full board approve it. And unfortunately, we can't, because of the board's meeting schedule, we really can't do anything more beyond that. We can't take advantage of that time before March. But again, I want to emphasize that, you know, one of the things I'm going to put out there is, you know, we need deep engagement with the Army Corps and the other agencies, and, you know, just conceiving this plan. They've told that, you know, the details are fluid. I've already, you know, people are kind of percolating with ideas, alternatives. As you'll see, what they put on the table is pretty blunt. It's pretty, you know, yeah, you'll see. It's, so I think we, you know, people are already thinking out of the box. And so we're going to think about, you're going to maybe suggesting creating a task force or a CAG related to this plan, and working with the Army Corps on this. So, but anyway, let me share my screen and I'll just quickly go through the, let's see. Go. Okay. Taken from, we have Bryce Weissmiller is the project manager for this plan. And let's see, the non-federal partners on this are the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, State Environmental Conservation, Department of State in New York, and the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. And you can see where the study areas is interesting. You can see it just vects the New York harbor area into New Jersey, up the Hudson River. But what I noticed was conspicuously missing from this plan is Long Island. I'd be interested to know, I mean, obviously way out of our district, but it's interesting that it's not included in this plan. So they presented what they're calling alternative plans. They're alternative to doing nothing, no action. And they vary in terms of in-water measures or infrastructure and land-based measures. And the plan that they're leaning towards is Alt 3B, which sort of has a, you know, balance between those two types of measures. This indicates the city is already either in the midst of developing and constructing their own plans. The East River Coastal Resiliency Plan across the river is already being constructed. If you do a search, you can see that you can see some of the flood walls have already been constructed, and the gates, storm surge gates, have gone there, and you see off of Staten Island. And this plan aims to kind of, you know, go beyond what the city is doing. And during their modeling in terms of what to expect from our atmosphere and from storm surges, et cetera, this is various predictors of sea level rise through 2160. I know it's probably a little hard to see there, but you know, the horizontal axis are the years, and then around, if I move my cursor around 2050, kind of the, you know, the median prediction is about 1 foot of sea level rise, and this is for, you know, off the Battery in Lower Manhattan. So 1 foot of approximately of sea level rise, which obviously if there's a sandy level type of storm, that will mean even more devastation from storm surges. And this is just a quick idea of what a storm surge barrier might look. Maybe, this is out in, the Jamaica Bay area. And there are features behind the storm barriers that there is risk reduction that is trying to be achieved here, but there's also kind of collateral issue, what they call induced flooding mitigation features outside the barriers that they may call, and so there has to be modifications related to that. And just quickly through the alternatives. Alternative 2 was constructing a barrier all the way across essentially the gateway in the harbor, I guess from looks like Long Branch, New Jersey to beyond the Rockaways. And as you can see, it's quite effective in terms of benefit. The green areas are essentially going to be protected, and there's a little bit of red up in the upper right-hand corner that will be unprotected and the edge of Rockaway there. But you see in the table later, the cost is the most expensive, and the construction timeline is one of the longest, and the lifespan is more limited than the others. Then moving to 3A, which more is focused infrastructure points, and you can see again up in Long Island Sound area in the upper right-hand corner, Rockaway, Coney Island, Staten Island, but as you can see, certain areas are starting to be left unprotected. Our areas you can see up here would be, but it's a shorter timeline for construction than alternative 2, but it's still out there, and you'll see it's $20 million more, billion dollars more expensive than alternative 3B, which is a tentatively selective plan. And as you can see, there's still a significant amount of red shaded areas that will not be protected. It's focusing on, again, Rockaways, Coney Island, the lower west side of Manhattan and the Battery. And you can see just a little bit of blue here. That's northern Greenpoint and Hunters Point, and Harlem and the Bronx. Alternative 4 is just heavy on more just a lot less hard infrastructure, and it just leaves a lot more area vulnerable. Though the construction timeline, I was saying the construction timeline for 3B. Okay, what happened to 3B? Oh, here we go. 3B is 14. Okay, very sensitive navigation here. 3B, the construction time is 14 versus 32 for 2, 24 for 3A. And you can see the cost is less significant, though still significant. And I'm not sure why I'm losing video here. An alternative 5 is almost, entirely shoreline-based measures without infrastructure, within the water. And the Army Corps is estimating that the protection is very small in relation to the other alternatives. If you want to take a deeper dive into the plan in terms of estimating just the conditions that they're analyzing, habitat change, air quality, water quality, historic properties, transportation, and others, the environmental consequences, the methodology they're using to estimate that. I'm going to put some links in the chat when I get through here about where you can go to investigate that. Here's the cost table, pretty staggering numbers. 3B is in the middle here. What I find really incredible is this contingency column. As a contingency is usually what, 15% you'll tack on to a project for construction or catering but these numbers are more like 40 to 60% contingency. And then the OMMR is operating, maintenance, repairs. And that's an incredible number. So the final number for 3B was 76 billion. 2 is 150 approximately. So something to think about. And and also the estimated full year's benefits. The Army Corps policy only allows a maximum 50 years, but their implementation potentially be considered for 100. But you see 3B along with Form 5 have the longest benefit lifespan versus A and especially 2. And then analyzing cost benefits and plan selection on an annual basis. Yes, if the area was to be hit by a 100-year storm again, spreading that over, I guess, a century, I don't know if it's a century or 50 years, the annual basis, the annual cost benefit, the net benefit. All right, and so diving deeper into 3B, which has tentatively been selected for the entire area, the very kind of crude proposal is basically to treat Newtown Creek and construct a 130-foot wide, calling a sector gate, essentially be a gate that would be open to a certain degree when there's not a storm, and then it would close during a storm. It would rise 17 feet out of the water, but to work with that in terms of, just the water potentially that would be displaced from that when that barrier is closed, they are suggesting tie-in infrastructure, which is flood walls, levees, seawalls, for, you see the area affects both the Hunters Point area, Long Island City, and northeastern Greenpoint. And as you notice, the flooded areas that will be protected, there's nothing south of that for like Bushwick Inlet and Wallabout Channel and near McCarran Park. So that's just something to note as we move on. I would expect, just looking visually, maybe a third of that 15,000 would be for Greenpoint, maybe 40%. Going for a closer look, you can see the storm. Okay, computer can please stop that. The storm surge gate, as you can see, it's in magenta, pink, going across roughly where Box Street Park will be at the northern edge of Greenpoint Landing. And then the time structure for Greenpoint would include a seawall, which essentially a wall that would essentially be adjacent to the water and is potentially come out, be constructed within the water, rising up to 17 feet. So essentially would go around the creek to Newtown Barge Park, where it would connect with a flood wall, which is, a land freestanding wall upland. So across Newtown Barge Park to Pont Street, traverse down to Pont back to the East River, where a seawall would be erected from Pont to Kent Street next to Transmitter Park, where a flood wall will go up partial way up Kent Street, cut across, connect to a levee that would go across Transmitter Park to Greenpoint Avenue, where a flood wall would go up Greenpoint Avenue all the way up to Franklin Street, so up that hill. Um, and so that's the essentially the situation that or the an overview of the plan as it relates to our area. I will. I just want to show you a couple other things. This is, as the Army Corps said, is an austere example rendering of what a seawall along the river at the end of Huron Street would look like. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner, looking out into the East River between One Huron and the Greenpoint, aka the Industry Tower, and then below that you can see what a approximately 17-foot tall wall would look like. It would just basically obliterate access to the waterfront and the view. And let's see if there's one other. It's just a closer look of the map. So back here. So the kind of the general, some of the main pillars that were kind of established, put out by the committee and the community at our last meeting was, I mean, the Newtown Creek is what probably, I guess, maybe the most polluted waterway in the United States. It's just laden with, it's combined sewage overflow, 13 of them that are, flowing during just a little bit of rain into the waterways, and then the legacy and current chemical contamination as part of the Superfund site. So, it's one thing interacting with flood water, especially salted water, but highly contaminated water. So feeling is, the feeling we got was that just has to be mitigated as much as possible. Because, some of us think, well, this waterfront, we had this rezoning shoved down our throat in 2005. And, we were promised Box Street Park, Transit Park wasn't part of the deal, but it was factored into the environmental impact statement. It's precious and valued by the community. And Newtown Barge Park was expanded, and that we were provided with waterfront access there where there wasn't. And part of the rezoning with the sort of a mitigating element in terms of with all, the density of buildings, the density of people that are coming to the neighborhood or in progress, was to have these waterfront public access areas, these connecting esplanades. And so there was kind of a, we were kind of weighing, the initial impulse. We have to protect people from the creek, but do we need to obliterate our waterfront in the process? And so people just started wondering, so question, what about south of Greenpoint Avenue? Because that's just going to continue to flood. And if you look at the flood map, future 100-year storms for our area, Bushwick Inlet, McCarran, and Wallabout Channel flooding down near around Flushing Avenue will be much worse. And so, so people were, just wondering about that. If the Army Corps mentioned cost, that would attribute more billions, and Catherine Thompson put out there, what about managed retreat? And then he started talking hundreds of billions or trillions. So we started having these conversations, and then I just want to finally add that in these when I was speaking to, I've spoken to folks in the Capitol Division of Parks, and Joanna interacted with City Planning in Brooklyn. Just noting again, this is going to be a long process. But also wonder about the data that they're using on the ground. Are they aware that Newtown Barge Park was redesigned? It has a berm going across where they're recommending a flood wall. Are they aware that on Greenpoint Avenue, there are a row of townhouses with businesses on the ground floor, and that there's a hill up from West Street to Franklin? And when the engineers I spoke to, this is exactly what we want to hear. His eyebrows arched when I told him that. So that's what I think I want to push for. So after, I've kind of said a lot. Katie, I know I was going to have Willis kind of come in and talk about Newtown Creek's review and perspective of this, but did you want to add something right now? Katie, Denny?
No, I'm happy to chat after Willis goes.
Okay. Same with you, Sante. Can you hold in there?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Priority to Willis.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Willis Elkins again from Newtown Creek Alliance to offer some insight about the plan.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I just put a link to, we put together some initial comments last month to, sort of raise a little bit more awareness of this and sort of get things, our mind around this. There's a lot we still, I think, want to understand about this. And also, Newtown Creek Alliance, we're working with some other groups from around the harbor that, represent other tributaries, places like Flushing Creek and Gowanus Canal and some sites in New Jersey, and that are all getting similar type treatments. And so, as you see in the link that I posted in the chat, some of our main concerns from NCA are about the impacts to the creek specifically. And, we're really concerned about this choking off the mouth of the creek. As Steve mentioned, the, conditions of the quality of the water in Newtown Creek are very severe. And, really one of the biggest benefits that the creek has is its connection to the East River, and we need as much flow as water from the East River to the creek as possible. And so if we're cutting that by 30%, a 400-foot opening down to 100-something feet, we're really concerned about that. So we're trying to better understand that. It gets really sort of technical. There's modeling involved of what that looks like. There's also concerns about when the gate would be closed at the mouth of the creek, and you have all these inputs, all the combined sewage overflow, millions of gallons of direct stormwater that's entering the creek. We also have secondary treatment from the wastewater treatment plant is entering. And so, the creek also acts as this conveyance from stormwater and wastewater from all these upland areas out to the East River. And so if that's blocked off with a wall, are we actually going to be, flooding some of the sites that we're trying to protect along Newtown Creek itself? And then, also, understanding this putting a gate at the mouth of the creek is not really going to do anything for sea level rise, as that's going to continue to increase, and that we have sites that are very low lying along the waterway as it is, and those are going to continue to flood during non-storm events. So, I think it's important that people submit comments. Doing it as groups and as like on behalf of the community board is great. I also think even just individuals should be submitting comments. It's going to be a long process. I mean, it's a major project. Like, the scale of this is so massive, but they really need to hear, as much feedback and diverse feedback as possible. So I do encourage that. And of course, we'll be sharing like our more formal comments as we get those together. We're trying to get more sort of technical input into some of the issues that are raised. But that's really, just a little bit of where we're at with this. And I think, the last thing is, like, obviously, I put a link to this map that sort of shows a before and after what areas would be protected. And, if there's any positive thing out of this process, I think it is, maybe it's a little bit of a wake-up call. If we haven't, been looking enough at future flood prediction maps for neighborhoods like Greenpoint, this is really severe. And, this is obviously not a great plan, like fencing off, putting giant walls along the waterfront. But it is, that's basically the scale of what the Army Corps is recommending to try and deal with sea level rise and storm surge. And so, we need some sort of plan going forward.
All right. Thanks so much, Willis. the folks just have initial questions for Willis before I go into the general questions and comments from folks. Darren?
Real quick, why does the wall go through the park and the height of the wall at 17 feet? What, I mean, the tide goes, if it's 17 feet from the water, the tide's up and down. So what does 17 feet mean? And then also the park question, why does it go through the middle of the park?
I can't answer that. I don't know if Willis.
Well, I think that the 17 feet is from like a mean sea level. So I'm not exactly sure. I believe it's like about mid tide. So that's something we're also trying to understand is like, where is the 17 feet? What does that look like in different areas, especially around the mouth? But my understanding is that 17 feet from basically, let's say, mid tide. So in some areas, you know, like you look at the Greenpoint Landing shoreline, most of that is highly elevated. So a barrier there on the shoreline side would be much shorter than, say, Transmitter Park. So that in terms of like why it goes through the park, I think basically because they're assuming that, you know, Barge Park there's no buildings there, so that part of that could withstand flooding more regularly is just a guess that I have.
Yeah, and I would just add that they said there's already elevation in the park, and I think we need to put to them, are they factoring in the current design of the park? And yeah, so yeah, but Darren, I'll log your question there. Katie, I think you've been waiting for.
Great, thanks. The other thing is, it's not always walls too. So there's like a close look where when I at first glance was looking at the maps and the different lines, you know, because they don't have renderings for all of these different scenarios, I thought that there was a wall going through the park. And then when I sat down and spoke with them, it was like a tunnel underneath. So in some cases, it's not a wall bifurcating certain land above ground, but you know, I went to the same presentation that Steve was talking about a couple weeks ago, along with Lisa Bloodgood, who many of you know, she's the newest member of our team. And of course, as a resident, you know, living near the Greenpoint waterfront, that's now this infamous rendering at the end of Huron Street, you know, it'd be horrific to live in those circumstances. And then, you know, I think some context that I heard at that presentation that is helpful as well, that was reiterated several times, was, you know, this was a sort of like congressional mandate that happened, you know, as early as 2017, that they wanted the Army Corps to come up with this plan that's, you know, years long, and they're finally unveiling it. But they emphasized multiple times there is no funding to actually execute the plan at this time. And they seemed very eager to hear the feedback. Steve, I had the same experience about Greenpoint Avenue, where I was like, what about the street retail? Like, what about the homes that are right there? You're going to build a 17-foot wall down a commercial corridor. And they were like, oh, well, we didn't know that was a commercial corridor. Or what about this lot? You know, there's a building there and you have a wall going right through it. Did you not know that there was a building there? And so the answer is no, they don't know a lot of these details, and they seemed super eager for that kind of feedback, emphasizing over and over again how conceptual it was. And that's kind of the response I think, Steve, you're getting as well from a lot of folks in agencies and things. Well, this is all conceptual. This is just on the table. Everything can be changed. So I think the two things to keep in mind are that, you know, feedback, it's very easy to be so horrified and angry by some of the imagery or ideas that are being shared. Because frankly, they're scary, right? To live in this sort of like fortress, right? Or why certain parts of the neighborhood versus other parts of the neighborhood. But it seems like what we're experiencing now, in terms of the renderings and proposals, is very, very far from what is really going to be put in the ground in the future. All this to say, collecting this feedback and filling in those gaps, like, there's a building there, or that's a commercial corridor with homes and street retail. Or, you know, there's fill there. Like that's all really critical information that, you know, I think we're going to see quick changes once they start receiving the feedback from the community. And I've spoken to Willis about this, and, you know, I know he's working with a lot of, you know, organizations dealing with waterways, you know, on putting on my North Brooklyn Parks Alliance hat. We were talking to conservancies outside the neighborhood to look at it from a parks perspective. Obviously, we are unique of how many parks we have on the waterfront in the Greenpoint Williamsburg community. And so, you know, this isn't just our neighborhood. This is an issue that the entire city is looking at. And so I think it's really important. Sorry, not city. I mean, tri-state, right? So Willis said he was talking to some New Jersey organizations. So I think that the more kind of outreach and collaboration we do, not just in this neighborhood, but beyond, is going to not only gather the kind of data we need, but also, you know, strengthen any sort of argument to improve the project or see what happens. I don't want to say stop the project because I know it's necessary, but to
Yeah.
make it more focused on the community.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Great, that was great. Yeah, I think, you know, what I'm getting, I think to think about, yeah, the initial, you know, the images are horrific. But I think maybe we can look at it as an opportunity. I mean, the reality is, you know, climate change is obviously, it's been here for a while. It's getting worse. And the sea level rise and storm severity is going to increase. So we have to do something. You know, we have nuisance flooding. We have, you know, I mean, we have the flooding from storm bursts with infrastructure on the streets and the sidewalks and homes that cannot handle it. But, you know, with this scenario, yeah, I think we just really, I think we have to do something. We might have, you know, consider tweaking our parks or, you know, addressing, and then the parks that haven't been built yet downriver and up, you know, in the creek, really being aggressive and what we're thinking about there, you know, and really, you know, bringing in as many people and layers of expertise. And yeah, it's just, you know, I just want to add that. So as presented, if we had this kind of zigzagging infrastructure up Kent and through the park and up Kent, then basically there'd be a deluge of water flowing down, you know, the shoreline, like, you know, the property adjacent to Transmitter Park and beyond. I know that the tower development, 11 West, you know, they've adhered to, you know, the new city planning, you know, zoning rules as far as their waterfront development. But yeah, we're just going to leave those areas to flood. I mean, it's just, you know, astounding. So, so I think Asante, I think you were next.
Sure, thank you, Steve. Well, Steve, I want to say, Steve sent me a couple email and asked me to look into things, and it's kind of, I got myself, probably have done the same, into a labyrinth of information. I ended up watching in Italian hours of a conference about the MOS. It's a system in Venice, which I mentioned at last committee meeting. Of course, you know, controversial in many aspects. And so I don't know what kind of input we can provide. Of course, I'm not a technician. I have some foundation to have understanding of certain things. And so, you know, but what I want to say from what I read until now, there's so much to read. And the more you do, it's a never-ending process. This is a very extreme things, and something that immediately, I was watching a conference about the MOS in Venice, which was very critical, and I don't know what that is. Translated from Italian, MOS, it comes from experimental electromechanic models, so which they are submerged in water and they lift, so you don't have a wall that is permanently visible. Of course, they failed. They were experimental. They corrected it. They even built a 50 million euro specialized boat to do maintenance there. this doesn't mean that this idea of not having a solid wall, for example, especially as these are planned from the Army Corps of Engineers, they are projecting a possible event at 50 years, I don't know, 100 years. We're talking about sea level rising 100-inch a year. So the projection of what I read was New York City in 2100, water level beyond any flood event should rise of 5 feet. So I don't know what that 17 feet were. But going back to the MOS, to this water in Venice was experimental, and of course had many impact on a far larger regional level, and it's a very basic physics. You know, water is going to go somewhere else, and you know, and this is a very complex system. And what I understood, this is what now we're looking very locally, but one of the study was about on the North Atlantic, East North Atlantic, events. And now we're scaling down here in our neighborhood, but it may be an alternative, you know, and so maybe a system like a MOS that could happen somewhere else could be less experimental based on the experience of other places. One of the reasons they did that in Venice because they didn't want to have a wall built in a larger area. So this could be something maybe to continue to explore as a possibility. But it is the idea. And one thing I heard in that conference, it was like this criticism about when the military get into, this was in Italian. And, you know, there was the militaristic approach to things. And of course, you will obliterate an entire population to save another. I don't know what it will be the approach, but it seems it's very extreme and it's very easy to do it. You know, you build a wall, but at the end of the story, I don't know what the cost I heard last time to this type of intervention in our estuary, trillions of dollars, billions of dollars. And my criticism in my years of activism and as just a community member, I saw zoning and rezoning and development. And one of the most effective way is like to give this land back. And I don't know why we have not done it. We still have development that is happening on the waterfront. It would have been far less expensive than build all of this to protect the investment and the speculation of all this development we have allowed when the federal government and the state should have acquired all this land and there were there's still marshes today. And so this is what I want to just launch out. What is happening to the future development? We didn't complete all our waterfront. It hasn't been fully developed. Are we going to think that we're going to have a wall and then we're going to raise even more so the building can be built and everybody lives 50-story above the 3-story of which we all are in a small scale building? They're going to still have visibility and the others are going to be behind the wall. I mean, those are questions. Should we alter any other future rezoning, any other future development? You know, maybe the one that already has happened. You know, I believe those are questions we should start posing. If this is an emergency, such an emergency measure that will require the federal government to intervene with the construction of such structure. And then there's something else I was reading about, and I entered into having to go to the dictionary to translate word from Italian into English. And one of the words that came, and it wasn't much difference actually, the subsidence, which is actually the sinking of our land. And New York City, since it's one of that city, is subject to the subsidence, you know, because of groundwater related issue. This was also an estuary and was, you know, definitely all our land was formed by this a huge glacier of 2 miles thick, 1 mile thick, that slide down from Canada, still our pebbles and our stone here, you know. So we kind of on a vulnerable ground. Even our waterfront where we are now in Greenpoint, it was created and built by debris, by carcass, organic material were deposited on the waterfront. and the East River, as Willis probably knows better than me and could talk more, was actually not that deep. The depth of the East River has been caused by building all these docks, and the waterfront was never built to be was built to be a temporary place to build ship as a shipyard and put sheds and put docks, and we took what was never land to be land for development. So those are the question, and maybe we don't need to have a wall. We have to think what is resilience for us, more than asking a building or a tower to become resilient. How can we take advantage of our own land and the territory to naturally be our resilient measure? I will ask Willis if he can comment more on this, because I know he's knowledgeable about this, and I'm ignorant, but I'm going to continue reading about this, and I believe these are things that I don't know if are important, but I believe are important to consider moving forward if we're going to have conversation about this.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sanjay.
Sorry, guys, for taking the time, but
It's okay.
thank you.
Yeah, so moving on. Willis, did you want to respond to?
No, I mean, no, I think we should keep going.
Okay,
with
yeah,
those
okay.
Comments and stuff, yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I've noted your points and your questions, Sanjay. They're very, very important. Kevin Lachero.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think something I just want to make sure, I guess something that was on my mind when I was looking at that wall in particular, and I guess Steve, kind of in a similar vein as what you were talking about, is we have a number. There's a great deal of acreage of parkland along the East River on our end that's still being developed. Obviously, most of Bushwick Inlet Park, Box Street Park, etc. And I just am wondering, I mean, like looking at the example on the Manhattan side of things, if this is something we should be thinking about, right? Where the East River Park, with obviously, a great deal of back and forth about it, but they said, okay, in order to protect Manhattan from sea level rise and these storm events, we need to put 8 feet of soil on top of this park. And obviously there's a lot of back and forth. I just am thinking that to avoid a little bit of heartache and heartbreak, and the same sort of contention on this side of the river that Manhattan saw, if that's something that we should be thinking and talking about as we go forward with designs around Bushwick Inlet, especially because, I mean, that's the other watershed, right? You have like the Newtown Creek watershed, and then you have the Bushwick Inlet watershed. And like flooding, when you look at the future projection flood maps, like that's where it's the worst. No protection for McCarran Park, no protection for the inlet, and down Navy Yard, down to South Williamsburg, where the flooding is most severe in these events. And so I think that's just something, there's a lot of overlap between the Environmental Protection Committee folks and Parks folks, both, in individual organizations and with the community board. So, that's just something. But the other thing, I guess, and this really highlights for me, I think, just continuing to move forward with the deal of speed and urgency that Willis is talking about, that this is a real crisis, about creation of public spaces, more public spaces in this community, which is something we know how to do well, but making sure that those spaces can take and absorb stormwater, right? So like looking at the asphalt lot in McCarran Park, looking at public plazas and open streets, looking at street ends, like the Transmitter Street end or the Apollo Street end, or whatever it may be, and talking about how those areas can be taking and absorbing stormwater, the softer infrastructure stuff that Sanjay is talking about. And I think that like this is really a wake-up call for what we need to be doing moving forward. I mean, it's concerning to me. They didn't talk at all, for the folks who were on the meeting, they didn't talk at all about anything south of the inlet or inland measures.
No, that's it. This recommended plan, it's in terms of cost and benefit, is right in the middle, but yeah, it leaves a lot of area vulnerable. Yeah. Versus, the original plan that was out there a couple of years ago was to install this massive barrier across the entrance to New York Harbor with, I don't know if there was one gate or several gates, but there's a lot of pushback on that, I think for environmental reasons. And I think the life expectancy of that idea, of that structure was vulnerable there. But yeah, I mean, that's, it just made me think of, from this meeting with the Army Corps, the presentation, the colonel in charge of that division, he just put it out there, one of the key problems with, devising this plan is a lack of real estate in which to, create infrastructure to deal with this. And I think, going back to what Santi was talking about, we had salt marshes and we had land expanding out of there, but then, the birth of land speculation basically snowballed. And
Also, I imagine, and this is something that I just would make sense to me, is that one of the reasons why they're protecting the northern half of Greenpoint, I mean, is because of that value capture. I mean, it's so it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? I mean, the reason why they're saying we got to protect is the same reason why they're protecting Lower Manhattan. So they're going to spend $100 billion to protect $10 trillion of real estate and value, but I think it's how we make it work for us and how we make it something that, in talking about the inland measures that can be done as well as across the board. I mean, how can McCarran Park take twice as much water, 3 times as much water, 4 times as much water as it can take now in these areas that we know are historically wetlands and infill. But anyway, yeah, I don't want to take any more time, but thank you, Steve, and everybody. I think that there's a lot more coming with this. And
great. Thank you, Kevin. William Vega.
I'll be brief. Thank you, Steve. Is that when I worked for the city, Small Business Services, and I was out there with the emergency response unit because of Hurricane Ida, the model that was used by the city, because there were certain areas that weren't supposed to be impacted by that rain surge. And as you know, we lost a lot of neighbors that were trapped in the basements. My main concern, and when I did a little research myself, is that the models they're using, their formulas are already outdated. And also the fact that they have to clean up Newtown Creek before they could even put these mediations in place. And we all know Newtown Creek, Willis could say, I don't know how many years from now that's going to be done. And also what Katie said, we also have to, and Kevin and Steve, concern ourselves about the other developments, because it's only as strong as the weakest link. And whatever that weakest link is going to get the surge. And what I'm hearing is we're going to get additional surge. But I believe we do have time. And then the last factor is that this is Congress. And right now, Congress is Republican held. And as you can tell right now what's happening in D.C., the funding for these ideas, I don't see them coming until in the far, far future. So we have time to get people involved. I have 2 neighbors that couldn't make it tonight. One is in Norway dealing with this issue, and the other one's actually in D.C. and attending environmental committee meetings. So as soon as I get free, I'm going to, if it's okay, Steve, I share your email so we can add them to have some technical expertise. And specifically with our neighbor, Christine, who's in Norway dealing with this coastal flooding. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Please put them in touch with me. Thank you. Christopher Josephson.
Hi, first time caller. I have a question to Willis. What's the Newtown Creek Alliance opinion about the other plans? Is there a sort of an easy way to rank them according to you? My understanding is a fair amount of the plans shared is sort of the wall, the 17-foot wall, which seems to be the main concern in some sense, but that's just because there's a picture of it and it's an easy way to get stuck on something. But is there a sort of a TLDR of the Newtown Creek Alliance ranking of the 5 proposals?
Yeah, you're talking about from the 5 proposals that the Army Corps originally put forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, I think that most of them we have the same concerns with most of them. It's kind of like bigger walls to smaller walls. And, I think one of the, big challenges is trying to propose an alternative that we feel is good. I mean, there's stuff in the chat talking about, Catherine and Margaret talking about flooding, it's coming in through pipes. And so I do think there's a lot of sort of smaller types of investments to our infrastructure that would help with And William was talking, about Ida and flooding from rain events, which is going to be more common. So I think there's a lot of approaches to deal with climate change issues in general, whether it's sea level rise, storm surge, massive amounts of rains, urban heat island, that can be addressed through things like green infrastructure, better, adapted infrastructure in general, that would help with this. But we don't have a set opinion about the 5 proposals. I think a lot of them are just taking these very hard engineering approaches, which a lot of people have talked about so far is problematic. And we've seen this in many other places as well, where walls don't always last. And, it's also like, it's not that we're going to get to 2100 and then sea level rise is going to stop, or we don't really know, but it's going to continue to accelerate given the pace of things. So, sort of trying to aim for some sort of measure as to like what is a comfortable level of how high a wall can be, I think is probably a little bit of a false approach too. But we're certainly, interested in more natural solutions and looking at specific areas where the low-lying properties right now that we can start, maybe trying to elevate or retreat from, and so on and so forth.
Certainly some of the plants would, if you had $100 billion budget, some of the plants would maybe be able to allocate half of that to alternative things than just the wall. So maybe that would speak for the sort of the cheaper plants.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty brilliant. I was just thinking, that, when, Hurricane Sandy, just, impacted our area, New Jersey and beyond, Congress came up with the relief money, just billions upon billions of dollars, year after year, hurricane events, earthquakes, et cetera. The war in Ukraine, that's up to $100 billion approximately. So why can we preemptively make the investment now? And yet what's coming up in the chat has been a recurring theme is just the upland infrastructure is not handling the water into people's homes and businesses and on the streets, and people getting trapped in their cars and people dying in their basements and just ruining and impacting their homes. Just to have kind of a it's acting like it's with the urgency that it is an emergency. I think we're just kind of in a dream we're trying to escape, and your body will only run at a certain pace. You're kind of frozen, and I feel like that's kind of I'm glad that there is this mandate, and we're kind of forced to think about it with these horrific renderings. But it's just are we making enough of investment in the right place? And we just just touching on the subsidence and underestimating. I've mentioned it before that in New Orleans, the levees that they rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina have already failed because they underestimated sea level rise and land subsidence there in New Orleans. So I think that's something really got to put out there. Let's see. Excuse me 1 second here. Looks like there was somebody who had been hanging on for a while. I think we lost her. It was Christine.
I'm Christine Hunter.
Yes. Oh, there you are. Okay,
Yes.
you're on video. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Good evening, all. I'm Christine Hunter. I'm the co-chair of land use for CB2 in Queens, which is directly north of you, so right on the other side of the creek. And I have to confess that our community board this has not been so much on our radar, although we have a great many environmental concerns and have been discussing, resiliency in Long Island City for a long time. But immediately, I think we want to arrange a presentation from the Army Corps similar to the one that you had, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, because we are, the two areas are really equally affected by this proposal. And I think going forward, I think I can speak for the board to say that we'd really like to stay in touch and perhaps, create some kind of joint comments, since the waterfronts really are continuous and we're on both sides of Newtown Creek.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I've very much had your board on my mind about, connecting and working through this. And that's what I thought of, if we, get some sort of task force or CAG together, should, we work together, our areas together, but I know that the geology of Hunters Point South and Gantry Plaza Parks and Hannibal Basin are different than what we have on the Greenpoint shoreline, but we share the creek.
Well, we do, and I mean, and obviously our waterfront is perhaps more fully built out at this point, although not totally. And
Right.
Anyway, I mean, there's just many concerns in common, I think, and
Yes.
so if we can, I'm not sure quite why we were not, contacted or didn't connect with the Army Corps earlier to have a similar presentation to yours, but if we can reach out to you just for information on that, who to
Sure.
contact and all of that, that would be
Sure,
great.
let me, I'll put my email address in the chat, and please reach out to me and I can connect you to the Army Corps and
Great.
anybody else who wants to contact me can. Okay.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Francois Olivas.
Hey, first, thanks to everyone for all the input so far. Willis, will Newtown Creek Alliance be doing more meetings that maybe a larger community group could come to for CSO? Because I live on Kent between West and the water. So I think there's already tons of issues with CSO that aren't being talked about as much as they need to.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I would like to do that because as I mentioned, like this long-term control plan that Steve brought up early is really massive, and the Newtown Creek portion got approved many years ago, but there's still options to amend it, and also the East River section has not moved forward. So we've been sort of like waiting for DEP to give us some input, insight. But yeah, I'd be more than happy to do more communication outreach and have a meeting specifically about CSO and the creek and how it fits into what's happening on the East River as well.
I'm looking at the Open Sewer Atlas, like a pamphlet that I actually got at some Newtown from years ago, and it's there's an outflow right at Kent Street, which we as residents can smell basically every time it rains. So I'm happy. I'd love to try to partner with you and just have the residents, because there are condos here, as well as the affordable housing, and people are thinking that they will be living here for 30 to 35 years and are concerned with how buildings are currently being built. A lot of them are already seeing a lot of problems and falling apart. But I think just getting some new community members involved who are pretty concerned.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, and then this is a kind of crazy question, but can the 2005 rezoning be relooked at? Because based on climate change, it's not environmentally sound. And we are building affordable housing as well as luxury towers on marshland. So is that anything we can talk about? I mean, I think with a pile driving at One Java, our building shakes every other second. It's like the scene in Jurassic Park where the T-Rex is coming and the water is shaking. Our water has turned brown because of that. It gets fixed, but there seems to be a lack of cohesive communication between developers. And I just don't understand why we're continuing to build in a flood zone, as well as developers are getting, kickbacks, millions of dollars for air quote affordable housing.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that's a recurring theme tonight, Francois, that, about, the rezoning, and it just seems madness the way, if you want to call it planning our waterfront in relation to this. It triggers another question that's come up, you know, and I alluded to it earlier, is I think, you know, the zoning rules for waterfront developments were modified to address climate change through the city. So what is the Army Corps', how are they considering those rules, or are they choosing to override them and feel like they're inadequate? And then it ties into what other people have said, like Sante and Kevin and others. Like, what are we doing, you know, in terms of allowing this, these developments to continue, knowing what the challenges are, and related to not just, you know, with the topic of tonight, but just whether our infrastructure can handle it in terms of, you know, wastewater, storm burst events, et cetera. And, you know, it's another Environmental Protection Committee topic we could have. We've kind of, you know, we've gone there a little bit in terms of the CSOs, et cetera. But yeah, so I'll definitely, I'm documenting every, you know, what everyone's saying here, and I'll include that. Francois, did you have a little bit more to say? Or?
Yeah, so I mean, I just think, you know, I think just repeating what a lot of people are saying, that it's just ecologically and environmentally short-sighted, and how, you know, protection can be set up with nature and vegetation. And then also, what happens if the wall is half as high? You know, I guess, why is it 17 feet? You know, could it be smaller or shorter? And I mean, I'll put some in the links, but I mean, I grew up in DC, and so the way they've been dealing with the Potomac River surges is they've actually built walls that go up and down, and then they've built kind of like steps in. So I'll put that in the chat, but I just think it's interesting to see different versions of what can be developed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm into that. We have really, if people have, you know, examples they want to bring, like what I encourage you to do is after the meeting tonight, if you have examples, links, or just thoughts you want to write down, to send them to the community board, you know, noting this, the plan and environmental committee, and include that in our comment and in the process. Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a great question. They put the most crude idea out there, you know, in terms of this 17 feet wall, and how, you know, can we, you know, as alluded to, you get over the horror. Okay, maybe we need to redesign Transmitter Park, but do it in a very beneficial way where it's still a very, you know, accessible, engaging, naturalistic environment, but it's protecting the neighborhood from the storm surges. And same, I mean, Newtown Barge they've already redone, but I don't know if they have to tweak it again. But
yeah, but I think even, you know, and Steve, I know you and I have had these conversations, but even along the Delaware coastline, you know, it's different because of, you know, we obviously have a much larger population, you know, but what they have done there is really, in some ways, restoring the shoreline with nature to avoid this. You know, and I think when I was in DC speaking with some people who have worked with the Army Corps, you know, the first thing they said is that Army Corps loves to pour concrete. So be creative and push back. So I think it's just a time for our community to come together as we've done before, because it's kind of appalling what they've presented.
Great, thank you. Yeah, if the other folks can just hang on there 1 second. I just remembered Rhonda Messer is here from DOT. And Rhonda, I wonder if I could just ask you a question relating to this plan. Just wonder, are you?
Ask me a question. I have somebody from Zach Youngerman from DOT Resiliency, because this is really out of my wheelhouse. I'm the liaison.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So a couple of things I want to put out there is, you know, the plan in its crude state. I mean, it'd be amazing if it actually gets implemented, having a flood wall go up Greenpoint Avenue on the street, but I just wonder if there's any precedent for that in the city. And if DOT is aware of what they're proposing here for this section of Greenpoint. And in terms of purview, one thing that's pointed out is, some of these, the Greenpoint waterfront developments, they're already having to raise their properties, but the upland connectors from the water to, down the street are not being raised. So there might be a situation where might have to have some sort of infrastructure there, a gate, a surge gate that opens up, that swings open. So is that something that DOT is considering, both, that scenario and then having flood walls go up and down street blocks?
Hi, thanks for that question, or a couple questions. And I'll say I happen to be a CB1 resident, and good to see some familiar faces here. As Rhonda said, I'm the Director of Resiliency at DOT, and we're certainly looking at plans across the city, and are anticipating submitting some generalized comments through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice is compiling all of the agency comments. So we have some comments which are sort of general, related to conditions that repeat, and some specific intersections. Your question about sort of alignment going up the middle of the street, and how the city has dealt with that so far is a good question. On the east side, coastal resiliency, there are I don't know what you want to call it, tiebacks, but they cross the street. I can't offhand think of a situation where the tieback is going up, following the right of way rather than crossing it. And as has been said so far in this meeting, it really is preliminary, and so there are a lot of questions that we would still have about where it might be located in the right of way, and all sorts of concerns depending on that positioning. The deployment question and gates, DOT does, or it's part of our responsibilities with other coastal protection projects to manage the deployment, the activation of gates. And so certainly the number of gates, the scale is something that in some future scenario, we would have to be taking into consideration in terms of overall cost and staffing, et cetera. And for that reason, we as a department tend to prefer berms and walls and things that don't have to be opened and closed, and for which there is not, staff mobilization. I think I partly answered some of your questions, but let me know if you have some follow-ups there.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Kevin, did you want to ask Zach something?
Yeah, thanks. I know other people have their hands up, so I'll make it quick. But Zach, that's something that we've talked about as a community before, and something that maybe, to get on your radar, especially as we're moving forward with this, is in talking about making more resilient areas along the waterfront, both the Newtown Creek waterfront and the East River waterfront. There's a great deal of appetite, I think, in this neighborhood, and a great many street ends that I think, you know, and not, again, to iterate, not for Sandy level events, right? I mean, you know, you can make, you can rip up every, you know, you could put green roofs on every roof and do all that. It won't matter when Hurricane Sandy comes, but for the many, many, many more cloudburst events, heavy rain events, you know, that's something I think that, you know, it would be great to have like maybe a targeted conversation with DOT and some of the community organizations that are doing that work and people that are interested, because there's a lot of, you know, low hanging fruit. You know, I mentioned earlier Greenpoint Avenue Street End, which is already connected to the transmitter park. You know, Apollo Avenue Street End, which is, you know, at Willis could talk about it, but it's at an incline. Really, if you're talking about spaces to test stormwater absorbency running down towards the Newtown Creek, number one. And all these other street ends, you know, which are currently basically turnaround driveways for the luxury buildings, where it would really be with a small level of investment from the Department of Transportation. You know, these places are ripe for storm absorbency measures that this community is really, really, really eager to see. So I don't know if that's something that you all are thinking about. I mean, I know that it is, but just specifically in this neighborhood, there's a great deal of appetite for it and a great many street ends.
Yeah. I guess my response, and unfortunately gets into a bit of the sort of split within DOT on how things are managed. We do have a green infrastructure unit and public space urban design units who I think are more towards what you're talking about in terms of the stormwater and maybe CSO side of things. Depending on the kind of distance from the waterfront, we also have a waterfront rehabilitation program that does specifically deal with street ends, and as part of the not officially, but certainly sort of thinking through the city's local law 41, the climate resilience design guidelines, our intent with the rehabilitation of these waterfront adjacent street ends is to have them be resilient and to consider some degree of sea level rise and higher elevations. So that sort of isn't an answer to what you're talking about. Certainly happy to discuss separately specific street ends that you have in mind, and we can see exactly where that fit in, and obviously certain programs have different resources and sort of funding schedules than others, but yeah, interested to see which ones you're thinking of.
That'd be great. Would you be able to send me your email or something?
Yeah, I'll share it in the chat.
Great, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Zach. Really appreciate your attending tonight and offering your insight, and appreciated your answer to Kevin's questions. All right. But I'm going to move on to more comments. Another board member, Corey Canton.
Yes, thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for your comments. So I am, absolutely not an expert on this topic, but as someone who likes to go to the beach and potentially build a sandcastle, when you build a wall, obviously the water is going to need to go somewhere else. So dovetailing a little bit on what Kevin was just saying, and I think other people about the way the waterfront is currently structured. While I think that it would probably be hard to go back on the 2005 rezoning, a site like 40 Quay, I think I would love to make the comment that we need places for the water to go. So in addition to these street ends, really looking at the waterfront and making a collective effort to figure out, one, I think a wall is fighting against nature instead of working with it. But, you know, regardless, because I'm absolutely, again, not an expert on this, if the community is interested in looking at areas and pinpointing them that could be places for the water to flow, I think that would be a much more thoughtful approach to this, because to me, building a wall just means the water is going to go elsewhere. I don't know if more educated people on this committee have opinions on that they'd like to share, but I just wanted to put that out there and also mention Forty Quay.
Thanks, Corey. No, that's great. That's one of the themes tonight. And yeah, I think, you know, someone mentioned offline, I believe it was Darren, that, yeah, just these towers functioning as levees is pretty sad plan. Christina Neptarski, thanks for hanging in there.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. So I don't think my questions can be answered on this call probably, but kind of just picking up on the threads that other folks have picked up on. My first question is, I'm wondering how this is going to interact with the city's waterfront resiliency plans. And that was my initial question. And now I'm thinking, you know, I saw Erica's comment about the flooding that happens routinely near the Newtown Creek water pollution plant, which I think the state is involved in kind of looking at that issue. So my question is, what sort of interagency coordination is happening? Is the Army Corps of Engineers talking to the city about kind of what they have planned for the waterfront? I know the city has put out coastal protection guidance as recently as I think end of 2021. What are their conversations like? How do their plans or kind of their predictions line up with one another? So that's kind of on the agency side of things. On the community side of things, kind of going back to the environment, the green infrastructure piece. I think if we were to kind of get a better sense of where the city is at on things, like Kevin said, really want to pick up on the word low-hanging fruit, right? What measures can we be looking at in terms of green infrastructure that can at least supplement a larger scale plan like this, right? Shouldn't we be looking at that first to say, what are the gaps that we can fill with green infrastructure before we have to put down concrete? Not saying they have to be mutually exclusive at all, but let's start with the green infrastructure, go from there. Especially seeing as we have a long timeline before this plan before we'd have shovels in the ground on this. And then just my last question is on more of the process procedure side of things. You know, I know Katie Denny mentioned, and it seems like the Army Corps of Engineers has expressed that they are open to input. From an organizing perspective as a community, do we have a sense of what those parameters are? Are we, you know, are they looking for input on the size and scope of the project? Or, you know, whether to go with Plan 3B or 3A, kind of just in order to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row as this is coming down the pike. Where are the pressure points? What should we be asking for? What can we be asking for? And what changes can we feasibly try to make in order to make this the best plan possible? Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. I really, really appreciate that. I think we're kind of gravitating together, you know, sort of a jigsaw puzzle with some of these, you know, kind of these ideas, these sketches that are coming together. I mean, just to kind of, you know, they left things pretty vague, just, you know, to kind of build on what Katie Denny spoke to, that this is like city planning, parks, and I mean, how DOT has kind of echoed the same thing, that they want community input. And there's definitely, he said the details are fluid. They didn't really go into details, but as I said, we've pointed out, issues. You know, we have businesses and a giant loft historical pencil factory building. And he's like, oh, really? You know, those types of things. And just, yeah, just, I feel like there's just, you know, a process before we get to this massive plan that the city and other agencies could be doing. I think that's just things we really want to take about. But I think, you know, just giving ahead to next week, next month is, yeah, I want to demand to know what the process is for engagement, and that, you know, we have to have a organized, solidified, you know, community force to interact with the Army Corps and the other agencies that are partnering with them. Because I mean, this is bigger than the rezoning. I mean, in many respects. And that it was a task force that met for 2 years, approximately, analyzing that. And we want a better result, that's for sure. Okay, so I know Darren, you went already. I just want to see if there's anyone else.
I think it's
Maureen.
Yeah.
Maureen Boiler. Sorry if I almost lost you there, but please go ahead. Thank you for waiting.
Oh, that's no problem. I'm very happy to see that people are actually paying attention to this. When Sandy happened, you could see how the East River literally moved back to its old banks, if you will. And if you walk through the neighborhood anywhere, I'm over next to Broadway, and you can actually see how there's this dip where at one point the East River came up as far as what we call Wythe Street. And I think that whenever we think about anything that we're going to have to do, we have to remember that the first thing we have to do is we have to bring much of it back to the way it was in order to be able to deal with the present problem that we have with global warming. Other areas, if you look in New York City, they have a huge distance before they have any residential property. So if you take the M train and you look at what they're doing at on the other side of Manhattan in the East River space, the work they're doing goes all the way up to Clinton Street. So they obviously have a plan that goes much further than what you would see if you were just standing at Domino Park and we're just looking across the way. So that's really something that you have to consider. Last year, I read an article, and I will try and get more information to see if I can find out if it actually worked. But Paris blocked off one of their canals. They drained the water and they blocked it off, and they dug out all of the crap. And I think that's probably the most efficient way for us to handle the Newtown Creek problem, because it's not something that we can do slowly. It's really something that has to be done fairly quickly. And I'll just see if it ended up working. I think it actually did. And then the last thing is, we're going to be changing and changing and changing and changing all the way along. This is going to cost, if you go from the Williamsburg Bridge and you go all the way around to the new end of the whole Newtown Creek development, we're talking about $200 billion. And I don't think anybody should worry about cost. I don't think anybody should be intimidated when a bureaucrat tells you something about cost. You just ignore them and you just keep pushing forward. That's not something that we need to worry about. The money is there and we'll have it for us. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Maureen. Let me just make sure there's missed anyone else. Okay, Darren, did you have something else to add?
Well, I want to talk out this whole thing a little bit. So one, Francois, Maureen, I mean, I'm with both you. Yeah, 2005 rezoning. I'd love to get rid of the buildings and bring back the aquaculture. But I mean, I don't think it's not a way we can go forward. What I want to remind everybody is that none of the tower buildings were built until after Sandy. And that means that all those buildings were built to the post FEMA guidelines that included Sandy. And that means that I was doing some research. Greenpoint Landing committed to building 11.5 feet above grade, right? So right now, the easiest way to see it is if you walk down to the Twin Towers, those two white buildings at the corner there, their lot, you can look straight down 11 feet and you can see how high they've been raised. So it's not just the towers that have been raised, it is actually those street ends that are to that new height. So these buildings, I don't know if the buildings are acting like levees, Steve, but they're built to a height that is above a flood zone from Sandy. So my point I'm trying to make is we already have, once all these buildings are built, Box Street Park is built to the FEMA guidelines, Barge is built to the FEMA guidelines, Transmitter's not. But once the rest of everything is put in, we already have that height. So my question back to the Army Corps is why do we need to go, how high do we need to go? Do we need to go above this 11.5 feet? And if we do, yeah, we can't protect the buildings, but we can make berms in between the buildings and increase the ways, and we could protect that waterfront view. Because at the end of the day, I think everybody here, I mean, it seems like that's what we're after, right? Is to not to stare at a wall when we're in the Esplanade. I think we can all agree that our goal is to be able to see the water, but still be resilient. And that's really the main point I wanted to make. And one other thing I want to say, which is I don't understand how they're going to wall off India Street Pier and have the ferry run. The only way I can think to do is you'd have a stairwell that goes up. You walk up a stairwell and down a stairwell to get around that wall, so you can go to the ferry. So I'd like to hear what the Army Corps has to say about that.
Well, they probably have like a gate of some sort that would open, but still, it's a really, it's an important question. There are 5 CSOs, along the East River also. How are they going to deal with those? But yeah, I think it's a great question. I know I've spoken to one of the owners of Greenpoint Landing, and to say that she's not happy is, tremendous understatement, considering, what they invested in to comply with those guidelines. So she's going to submit some comments to the board. She's consulting with experts and with some of the other developers on the waterfront. Because, obviously it'll be a big hit to them, if this is actually built as is presented. But again, those are waterfront public access areas, those esplanades. So, people had to climb over fences to get to the waterfront, and now we have access to them. It was sort of a community benefit during the rezoning, so it's taken away from it also. But that's it's a big question. I'm really planning to include in our comments.
And I did write you that, Steve. I don't know if you saw that one email I wrote you that is in the zoning text filed with the city, is that waterfront access is part of that plan. So it would technically be a legal technicality against that rezoning, and it potentially, if people wanted to fight it, these future buildings, we potentially stop them. But I don't think
that's
it's
that's an
it's not a
interesting
fight. I
question.
think it's worth fighting, but I'm just saying that.
Yeah, well, can the federal government override city zoning? That's another interesting question there. So,
Steve, I
we've
think
reached-
that's kind of, this is important, is if the federal government can look at the rezoning that the city did, because it's just not environmentally sound. And also,
Yeah,
some of the buildings are not, the buildings aren't built the same. You know, I think since we do have segregated affordable housing along the waterfront, those are built with lesser materials. So they're seeing
Right.
very different things happening in those buildings versus luxury towers. You know, when it's combined, you know, some buildings are built well, but a lot of these buildings are not built well. I mean, look at the building on Manhattan Avenue that hasn't had, you know, heat and hot water, you know,
Yeah.
for months.
Yep. No, very good point. They did say that there are going to be layers of approvals that are needed to get through this beyond getting the, the budget approved. So, Lisa Bloodgood.
Yeah, hey everybody. This has been such a great conversation. I love our community so much. I was just wanting to bring up that kind of Christina Napolitano was really made this point so well. Like, what is the interagency conversation like? Where is our city-led process? I know within the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, there have been 2 rounds of these climate knowledge exchange discussions that have been taking place. And I know the director of that office has changed. I don't know. I guess it's Rohit is leading it now, and there's been a consolidation of the different agencies as well. But you know, there were some really great discussions and some great plans that were made within that agency, and I want to know what's happening with that. And yeah, why aren't we seeing more leadership out of our city agencies helping our community boards connect? Like, I love that CB2 is here from Queens, but why isn't there a coordinated effort to make these kinds of, you know, always with the siloed approach with the city, with the state, with the federal government? So there has been so much work in so many different agencies in so many different ways. Where is that now? And why aren't we hearing from the city, thanks, Mayor, when the Army Corps is presenting all of this stuff? So I think that that is something that we should be asking for more of as a community as well. And just want to put that on everyone's radar, that there has been, you know, this climate knowledge exchange happening over the last few years. And I've been taking a ton of notes that I'm going to share.
Okay, that's pretty huge. Yeah, I just, that's a really good point. I just, with Christine, emphasize again, it was great that she connected with us tonight, but just, so everyone knows, the Army Corps didn't come to the community board. We reached out to them. And so I think that's a huge ball drop by the city and the Army Corps of not, zeroing in on the community boards that are going to be directly affected by this plan and reaching out to them. I just happened to be on Newtown CAG and I saw a presentation there that, I directed them to RCB. So yeah, I think that's going to be, a strong section in our comment areas, like, where's the city? Because all these, the DOT, city planning, parks, all deferring to this lead agency. And now if they've been doing this, this work, like, they've been, considering, for this for years, both at the federal level. And I feel like it was it just kind of came out of nowhere, at least,
I just want
for
to
a lot
add
of people.
one more thing. Sorry, Steve, to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We've had our congressional representatives change. And so I think, I don't know if that's slowed anything down with how our communications with the federal government has been happening locally, but I think, we need to work far more closely with Nydia's office on all of this as well, because she's such a powerhouse and her just her staff is great to work with, and I think they could be enormously helpful for us.
And the fact that most of her district is left unprotected by this plan.
Yeah.
Right?
I would say just know that I have some communication going with all of our local elected reps, including her office and Chuck Schumer's office. And we're hoping that at the community board, that something, a little bit grander beyond the board, like the board that potentially through Lincoln, there might be another, community related event to, distill and bring our ideas and our concerns directly to the core through them, so, yeah. So, Derek.
Thanks,
Okay, Lisa,
Steve.
that was really great stuff to consider. Thank you for your comments. I'm sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question. I raised this in the comments as well, but for the Corps of Engineer, I'm trying to understand how a wall like that would influence the groundwater table in, say, Greenpoint, Hunters Point. Not an expert, but what I've been reading kind of suggests that the first problem that typically surfaces for coastal communities in some areas like Miami is often cited is, the groundwater floods well before the ocean actually rises. And it seems like that could be the more like proximate problem for Greenpoint. And I can't find anyone who really proclaims to be sort of an expert on this part of Brooklyn in this area. And I'd love to be connected if there's anyone on the line that does know about that. But, related to that, I'm just curious, would building a wall exacerbate that problem or change, the way the groundwater flows in? Because what I do know from the research we've done is that the groundwater in Greenpoint, which is about 10 feet below the surface, does change in terms of pressure with the tide. So it's not a regular groundwater table, it's tidal. That's sort of my question, I guess. And anyone that has info, I'd love to hear it. And also just want to raise that maybe for conversations with the Corps.
Yeah, Derek, that was great. Can I get your last name just for the record?
Oh, sorry, Darvis, Derek Darvis.
How do you spell that?
Darves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I know in South Florida.
Lisa Blackgood won't probably answer that.
I do want to answer that. I mean, I'm not an expert on it either, but I started learning about this and became, as I do, kind of obsessed with it, and it is an issue, and we do have that additional complication. And I think that if we are talking, in our comments to the Army Corps, we do need to talk about our tidally influenced groundwater tables, and they do change. And it really does impact so much of our community, not to mention so much of our groundwater is incredibly contaminated. And so when that water is coming up, it's not just ocean water, it's not just groundwater, it is that legacy of contamination that we also have been, dealing with over the last 100 years. So I did say earlier in the chat, the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, has started looking more closely at the groundwater. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago in McCarran Park, there was a big Archimedes screw in the corner of, what is that, Bayard and Union, North 12th. And that was them looking at where is the groundwater and how has it been moving. And they, for many, many years, have been looking at what's going on in Long Island with groundwater. And for about 80 years, they had stopped looking at Brooklyn and Queens, and then they recently started looking again. I can probably dig out of my files a presentation that the USGS gave to the Harbor and Estuary Program Citizens Advisory Committee last year by my request, and could probably, maybe even have this guy come and speak to the community board if there's greater interest. There wasn't a ton of information that's fine-grained to our community because they'd only just recently begun looking at it again. But yeah, it is something that we should be thinking about. And, you know, this is why we don't have green infrastructure and rain gardens and bioswales in, you know, close to the waterfront, is because there's this vadose zone, that like beneath the surface soil area that can take groundwater. You can only put so much in. There's only so much space. So that's why we don't have more green infrastructure right around here. Well, one of the reasons anyways. But it is definitely something that we should be thinking about and talking about. And I can, you know, I'm happy to talk with this committee or anybody about getting more information in the future.
Okay, fantastic, Lisa. All right, I see a few second round hands. I think we'll take those and then we'll wind down and let Joanna go home. So I think who so Darren, you already went twice. Sante?
Sure, and just nothing specific, but you know, I've been looking at a lot of projects also globally, and I believe me and you, we spoke over the phone, Steve. What is happening? How you know this is a global issue in different form. You know, and how China, I was looking at project in China, how really they took an entire waterfront. It could be Williamsburg, Greenpoint all together, and instead of doing development, actually has become a park. You know, I wish, you know, we've been talking for years about naturalize the waterfront. Every time there was a plot of land coming from zoning and rezoning, the Greenpoint Landing, we've been asking desperately to naturalize, to have this access to the water. And what we had in response, and they knew about that, they raised and they distance us from the water. Now we're going to be distanced even more, obscured by the water and the view of anything. But for the future, important to say that we're going to have to re-envision our interaction with the water, you know, and what that means. We're going to have to try to halt any future development. There's part here down from west, from Milton Street, going all the way down to the Bushwick Inlet Park and being fully developed. Maybe we should think what we need to stop if this is an emergency, and really re-envision what is going to be our interaction. We're going to have to deal with water in different ways, and we're going to have to get far closer, not as an emergency, but you know, maybe we have to be more creative and look what other have done in other places, in other countries, and what kind of concept is people coming out. Certainly in concept and not dictated by the speculation, because what we are being trapped by is the speculation, and that's what we're dealing with, you know. So that's all. Just final comment, but we'll talk again.
Great, Sante, thank you. Kevin, your our final comment, and then I have some closing things to communicate.
Sure. Just thinking about in terms of talking about like areas that will flood, might flood, like what Erica was talking about earlier, which is like, again, this inland conversation, just going beyond the waterfront itself and just saying that like there's so much happening inland in terms of flooding in all these areas that were wetlands. To give folks a sense, you know, just about like some of the space that we're talking about, like recently we ran the numbers for acreage, right? And it's like now there's this BQE visioning stuff that's going to be happening, especially up our neck of the woods, right? And if you take all the land that runs from Metropolitan Avenue to the K Bridge, it's an amount of land about equivalent to McCarran Park in terms of space. So I mean, you know, there is a tremendous amount of space when we're talking about the roadbed in terms of like absorbency and, you know, in terms of areas to do resiliency work. But something I'm thinking about, and I guess this is kind of a question, maybe just something to think about, you know, is I'm thinking about Ayman Daigel's map, the map that was put together with so many different groups in the neighborhood a number of years ago that basically showed the historic streams and wetlands and all these different types of areas, the you know, the intersecting watersheds and so on and so forth, which illustrates this probably better and more clearly than all these individual anecdotes, you know, about this intersection floods, that intersection floods. And I know that I've talked with Willis a little bit about the possibility of you know, or maybe Willis, I don't remember if it was Willis or not. I apologize if it was somebody else, but about, basically putting that map back out there. And showing people that this is the space that we're talking about. Like this is what the infill looks like. This is what the marshland looks like. And I guess something that I'm wondering about also is just like within these areas, a lot of these were streams that were piped, piped streams that, those water levels will rise, not just groundwater, like that's groundwater, right? Those streams are groundwater. And like, that's going to be something that's going to overwhelm our sewer system in these types of events as well. This was kind of it was beginning as a question, but I guess it's more of a comment. But anyway, I'd be eager to talk to folks who were involved in the first iteration of that map with Imond, and maybe put this thing back out there on a t-shirt or a tote bag, as we're thinking about a lot of these areas going forward in the future. Anyway.
Sounds good, Kevin. Thank you. I'm going to just do one last screen share because, there's lots of, talk about, that's the extent of the estimated flooding. And so let me just bring, oops, it's a mistake.
Sorry.
This is a link to one of the maps that Willis put in the chat, one of the story maps. And this is, you can see this is our area here, that they're predicting, the next 100-year flood. And then, if the Army Corps does their thing, the Newtown Creek area flooding seems to be mitigated, but as you can see there around Bushwick Inlet Park, where my cursor is, and McCarran. This is near McCarran and going, beyond over by the BQE. And then going further south, which is on the border of our district, Wallabout Channel, the Navy Yard, you can see that there's flooding. That's Flushing Avenue down there. So, and then on top of that, just like I said, inland is, I think, something even before this Army Corps plans conversation, it's been coming up a lot. There's lots of talk about CSOs and, reimagining our landscape. So I think that's where we got to go. But I just wanted folks, just to kind of see what we're dealing with here. So with that, when I asked, what I'm going to start a working document for the committee where I'm just going to, distill all the comments that we've gotten and talk about our previous discussions, to draft a comment for the Army Corps that we'll look at our next meeting in February, and then inevitably have the board approve that. Welcome your input on. Yeah.
Steve, is this chat saved? Sorry, is the chat? There's so many great questions and links and feedback and thoughts in the chat. Before we get off, I don't know. I don't want Joanna to. Is the chat saved?
Yeah, I was planning to save it, but I'm going to do it right now just to make sure is.
That's why it's nice to have the chat open on these meetings.
It was going to be part of the committee report, but I'll send it around just the same. So,
cool, thanks.
That's the plan of action. And I said this has to be a beginning, not an end. At March 7th. But also, as Willis emphasized, if you want to make comments directly to the Army Corps, you can follow that link to the project page, and then you can just email the project manager, Bryce Weissmiller, directly. Yeah, so I just want to thank everyone for coming out. It was a long meeting, but obviously this is really critical conversation that we need to have, that the Army Corps sort of forced us to have, that we really was necessary. So and shout out to Joanna for coming back from her little vacation to dive right into Belly of the Beast with multiple meetings this week. Doing a wonderful job holding.
Thank you.
Holding for it. Yep. Yeah. With that, everyone, Happy New Year. Welcome back. We'll catch you soon.
Steve, I just want to say we thank you because you made all these things happen. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Steve, thank you so much for just all your knowledge and everything, you know, that you bring to our community and rounding up the troops for this one of first of many meetings.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, glad to do it. I feel like I know it was sort of my
And I also,
my turn to grab the torch from so many other people, you know, who have a legacy of, you know, trying to sustain this neighborhood, you know, so yeah, so
can I say, if anyone's looking for like a winter book to read, one of our local seniors suggested Historic Greenpoint, which is written by William F. Felter, but it goes back into like the 1600s and what they call the development of Greenpoint. So it's a great read if you haven't read it.
okay. Thank you, Francois. With that, everyone have a great night and catch you soon. All right. Bye. And Willis, thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks,
Happy New
Steve.
Year. Bye.
Happy New Year.